My name is Amelia Hart. I'm 31 years old. The day my boyfriend told me his therapist had identified me as the source of his anxiety, I simply nodded, packed a bag, and left a note on the kitchen counter. Problem solved. You're welcome. 24 hours later, the panic began. Looking back now, the signs were everywhere. Ryan Cole and I had been together for 4 years and living together for 2. About 8 months earlier, he started therapy after a miserable period at work. His supervisor was genuinely awful, and I was the one who encouraged him to seek professional help. At first, therapy seemed wonderful. He would come home, energized, talking about self-awareness, boundaries, and personal growth. I loved seeing him hopeful again. Then something changed. Around the 3rd month, every session somehow became about me. Dr. Whitlock says it's concerning that you ask about my spending. Dr. Whitlock thinks it's unhealthy that you want to know where I am when I stay out late. Dr. Whitlock says your obsession with keeping the apartment clean is really about control. At first I laughed, then I stopped laughing. Every ordinary relationship conversation became evidence in some invisible trial where I was always guilty. If I asked whether he wanted takeout for dinner, I was controlling. If I reminded him the dishes had been sitting in the sink for 3 days, I was creating unhealthy power dynamics. If I worried because he didn't come home until 4 in the morning without sending a text, I was being emotionally restrictive. The strangest part was how confident he sounded every time, as though one therapy session could erase 4 years of shared history. I tried talking to him. I suggested couples therapy so we could understand each other better. The reaction was immediate. Dr. Whitlock warned me about that. Ryan said. Warned you? About what? Controlling partners always want to manipulate the narrative. I remember staring at him, not because I was angry, because I genuinely didn't recognize the person speaking. Over the following months, I began shrinking inside my own home. I thought carefully before asking questions. Stopped bringing up bills. Stopped mentioning chores. Stopped pointing out problems. I found myself apologizing for things I hadn't done just to avoid another lecture about emotional safety and therapeutic language. My closest friend, Sophia, noticed. One night, while we were having coffee, she leaned forward and asked, "Are you okay?" "I'm tired." That's not what I asked. I didn't know how to answer, because the truth sounded ridiculous. How do you explain that you've become the villain in your own relationship and you don't even know when it happened? Then came Tuesday. I had just finished a long shift managing logistics for a medical supply company. I walked into the apartment and found Ryan sitting on the couch, holding his therapy journal. His expression immediately worried me. Not because he looked upset, because he looked rehearsed. "Amelia," he said softly, "I need to share something important from today's session." I sat down across from him. Part of me expected a breakthrough. Maybe he'd finally realized how strange things had become. Instead, he took a deep breath. "We've been doing deep work on my anxiety." "Okay. And we finally identified the source." He paused dramatically, then looked directly at me. "It's you." For a moment I honestly thought he was joking. When I realized he wasn't, everything inside me became strangely calm. He continued talking. Something about healing. Something about emotional triggers. Something about patterns. Most of it disappeared into background noise, because one thought kept repeating in my head. 4 years. 4 years of helping him through job changes. 4 years of supporting him through family conflicts. 4 years of comforting him after every professional disappointment. 4 years of paying roughly 70% of our shared expenses because his wellness coaching business barely covered his car payments. And somehow, I had become the villain. Finally, I nodded. "I see." Ryan blinked. Clearly, that wasn't the reaction he expected. I stood up, walked into our bedroom, pulled out a duffel bag, and started packing. A minute later, he appeared in the doorway. "What are you doing?" "Solving your problem." I folded shirts and placed them inside the bag. His confusion deepened. "What? If I'm the source of your anxiety, removing myself seems like the obvious solution. His face paled. That's not what Dr. Whitlock meant. Maybe not. I grabbed my laptop. But it's what you said. Amelia. You're overreacting. The irony almost made me laugh. For months I had been accused of controlling behavior for asking normal questions. Now I was calmly leaving, and suddenly, I was the dramatic one. I collected chargers, important documents, personnel, files, everything essential. The apartment lease was in Ryan's name anyway. Leaving was surprisingly easy. His voice started trembling. You can't just walk out. Actually, I can. We need to work through this. I zipped the bag closed. No. Ryan. You need to work through this. His eyes widened, for the first time all evening. Genuine fear appeared. Not sadness. Not heartbreak. Fear. And somehow that bothered me more. I walked into the kitchen and grabbed a pen. On a small note, I wrote, "Problem solved. You're welcome. I'll collect the rest of my belongings on Saturday. Please be out." When I reached the front door, Ryan followed me. Amelia. Wait. I looked back one last time. He was still clutching the therapy journal against his chest. Like a shield. Like evidence. Like permission. I suddenly realized I was exhausted. Not angry. Not devastated. Just tired. Tired of defending myself. Tired of being analyzed. Tired of being blamed. So I opened the door and left. I drove straight to Sophia's house. She opened the door, took one look at my bag, and stepped aside without asking a single question. That's what real friendship looks like. Later that night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. For the first time in months, the apartment wasn't filled with accusations. For the first time in months, I could breathe. 19 hours later, my phone lit up. The first message from Ryan appeared on the screen, and everything began to unravel. The first message arrived Wednesday evening. This is unbelievably immature. I stared at the screen and said nothing. A second message appeared. Dr. Whitlock was right about you. Then, another. You can't just abandon me like this. By midnight, the tone had already changed. Can we talk? I think there may have been a misunderstanding. Please come home so we can discuss this. I didn't answer a single one. Thursday morning started, with 15 missed calls. I woke up at Sophia's apartment and found my phone vibrating across the nightstand. Then came the practical problems. The electricity bill is due. What's the password? Where did you put the insurance cards? The internet stopped working. I can't access the account. Amelia. Please answer. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because every single one of those things had been things I quietly handled for years. Passwords, utilities, insurance, registration renewals, tax documents, household budgeting, maintenance appointments. I had tried teaching Ryan repeatedly. I had even created a detailed spreadsheet once. He barely glanced at it. You handle that stuff better than I do. That had always been his answer. Now, suddenly, he needed to know everything. By Thursday afternoon, the messages became even more revealing. How am I supposed to afford this place alone? There it was. The first truly honest question. Not, how are we going to fix our relationship? Not, do you still love me? Not, can we talk? The concern was rent. I remembered a conversation from 3 months earlier. I had suggested moving somewhere less expensive because I was carrying most of our financial burden. Ryan's response had been immediate. Dr. Whitlock says financial stress is often connected to control. Control. Everything always came back to control. Meanwhile, I was the one paying most of the bills. The messages kept coming. My check engine light is on. My registration expired. Where do I go for an oil change? I stared at the screen. Ryan was 29 years old. Not 9, 29. By Friday, he had started posting cryptic messages online. Sophia showed them to me. One Instagram story read, "Sometimes, people reveal who they truly are when you need them most." Another said, "Protecting your healing journey means letting toxic people leave." My personal favorite was accompanied by a photo of an expensive smoothie. Self-care isn't selfish. Interesting. 24 hours earlier, he had claimed he couldn't afford rent. Now he was buying $18 smoothies. Friday evening introduced a new player, Patricia, Ryan's mother. I ignored her first call, then another. Finally, she left a voicemail. Amelia, I don't know what's happened to you, but Ryan is devastated. He says you walked out without warning and left him with nothing. This is not how mature adults handle conflict. I listened twice, then deleted it. Left him with nothing. The apartment was fully furnished. The refrigerator was packed. There was several $100s in emergency cash hidden in the bedroom drawer that Ryan thought I didn't know about. But apparently, he had been left destitute. Saturday arrived, the day I planned to collect the rest of my belongings. At 10 in the morning, I sent a simple text. I'll arrive at 2 p.m. Please be out as agreed. His response came almost immediately. I'll be here. We need to talk. Of course he would. Sophia insisted on coming with me. Absolutely not, she said when I told her the plan. You're not walking into that apartment alone. At exactly 2 o'clock, we arrived. The moment Ryan opened the door, I knew he had prepared for this. He was wearing the navy shirt I once told him looked handsome. The apartment smelled like scented candles. Soft music played in the background. For a brief second, it felt less like a breakup and more like a strange performance. Amelia, please. I walked past him. I'm here for my things. His expression tightened. Can we just talk first? No. You're not even willing to listen. I listened for 5 months. Sophia quietly moved toward the bedroom and started gathering boxes. Ryan followed me around the apartment. Every room, every shelf, every box. Like a shadow. I think there was a misunderstanding. There wasn't. You took what I said too literally. You told me I was the source of your anxiety. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? He hesitated. For the first time. He didn't have a therapist, quote, ready. That silence said more than any explanation could have. I continued packing books into containers. Ryan's voice softened. I love you. I didn't answer. 4 years. Amelia. Still nothing. Then his tone shifted. What about the bills? There it was again. Not love. Not grief. Bills. What about them? I can't manage all this by myself. I looked up. The room suddenly felt very quiet. You can. No. I can't. Then, maybe you should have considered that before deciding I was responsible for all your problems. The words hit harder than I intended. His eyes narrowed. And for a moment, the mask slipped. The tears vanished. The wounded expression disappeared. Something colder emerged. You're really going to destroy my life over one comment? One comment? I almost laughed. One comment. Not months of accusations. Not months of being dissected and analyzed. Not months of being blamed for every inconvenience. One comment. Ryan, I said quietly. For 5 months, I've been your emotional punching bag. That's ridiculous. Every week I came home to discover some new flaw, Dr. Whitlock had identified. Because we were uncovering patterns. No. You were collecting excuses. His face reddened. This is financial abuse. Sophia nearly dropped a box. What? Ryan pointed at me. You got me used to a certain lifestyle, and now you're taking it away. The silence afterward was almost comical. Even Ryan seemed to realize how terrible that sounded. Sophia slowly turned toward him. You hear yourself. Right. This isn't your business. No, she replied. But wow. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then, I returned to packing. An hour later, we carried the final load toward Sophia's car. As I reached the door, Ryan grabbed my wrist. Not aggressively, desperately. Wait. I looked down at his hand. Then back at him. His eyes were wet again. I'll switch therapists. I said nothing. I'll do whatever you want. Still nothing. I'll tell Dr. Whitlock. She was wrong. For the first time, I felt genuinely sad. Because he still didn't understand. This was never about Dr. Whitlock. It was about him, his need to avoid responsibility, his need for someone else to blame, his need for a villain. What I want, I said softly, is to stop being your anxiety source. His grip loosened. I stepped away. Sophia opened the car door. We loaded the last box. As we drove away, I glanced back one final time. Ryan stood in the doorway. No tears. No pleading. Just staring. Watching. Thinking. The expression on his face sent a chill down my spine. Because for the first time since I had left, he didn't look heartbroken. He looked calculating. 6 hours later, the next phase began. The messages returned. Only this time, they weren't just desperate. They were dangerous. By Monday morning, Ryan had abandoned desperation and moved on to strategy. The messages arrived in waves. 1 hour, he was reminiscing. Remember our trip to the coast? We were so happy. I found your old sweatshirt. The next hour, he was threatening legal action. My friend knows a lawyer. You can't just abandon a relationship like this. You have obligations. The emotional whiplash would have been amusing if it hadn't been so unsettling. I still didn't respond. Then Monday afternoon, my boss called. The moment I saw his name on my screen, my stomach tightened. Amelia, he said. I need to ask you something strange. Immediately I knew. Ryan, what happened? We received a call from someone claiming to be your domestic partner. I closed my eyes. Of course. My boss continued. He said you're experiencing a mental health crisis. For several seconds, there was silence. Then I laughed. I couldn't help it. A short, exhausted laugh. When I explained everything, my boss listened carefully. By the end of the conversation, he sounded more annoyed than concerned. So let me get this straight. Go ahead. He told you that you were the source of his anxiety. Correct. You left? Correct. And now he's telling people you're unstable. That's the short version. A pause. Then he sighed. Document everything. That advice turned out to be important, because Ryan was only getting started. Tuesday morning, I received a notification from Facebook. Someone had tagged me. I rarely use the platform, but curiosity got the better of me. Ryan had posted a lengthy emotional essay. He never mentioned my name directly. He didn't need to. Everyone knew exactly who he was talking about. According to the post, he had been abandoned, emotionally neglected, financially manipulated, left without support, during a vulnerable period. Hundreds of words, every sentence carefully crafted to make himself look like a victim. The comments fascinated me. Most people offered sympathy, but not everyone. One mutual acquaintance, named Daniel, wrote, "Didn't you tell us last month that your therapist said Amelia was toxic and you needed to separate yourself from her?" The comment vanished within an hour. Deleted. Wednesday brought something even stranger. A Venmo request. $1,847. Attached was a message from Janelle, Ryan's friend. Ryan asked me to send this since you aren't responding. Apparently, I owed him half the rent and utilities for an apartment I didn't live in. An apartment entirely under his name. An apartment where my existence had supposedly been damaging his mental health. I took a screenshot and filed it away. The folder on my phone was becoming surprisingly large. Then Thursday happened. The message appeared from an unfamiliar number. At first, I assumed it was another friend of Ryan's. Then I read the introduction. This is Dr. Whitlock. I sat upright, read it again, and then a third time. The therapist was contacting me directly. According to her message, Ryan had expressed concerns about my behavior. She couldn't discuss his treatment, of course, but she wanted to encourage me to seek support. Apparently, abruptly leaving a partner could indicate unresolved issues. I stared at the screen in disbelief. This couldn't be real. I immediately took screenshots and sent them to Sophia. Her response arrived 30 seconds later. What the hell? Exactly. What the hell? Sophia's brother happened to be an attorney. When he saw the screenshots, his reply was even shorter. Save everything. That message became my new mantra. Save everything. Because things continued escalating, Friday afternoon, security called my office reception desk. Someone was waiting downstairs. The moment I entered the lobby, I saw Patricia. Ryan's mother stood near the entrance, clutching an expensive handbag and wearing an expression that suggested she was preparing for battle. Several employees were already watching. Perfect. Exactly the scene she wanted. Amelia. Patricia. We need to talk. No? We don't. She ignored that. Ryan is devastated. I said nothing. He isn't sleeping. Still nothing. He isn't eating. That one almost made me smile. Sophia had shown me 3 separate social media posts, featuring Ryan eating at trendy restaurants throughout the week. Apparently starvation looked surprisingly expensive. Patricia stepped closer. You traumatized him. The absurdity of the statement almost took my breath away. I traumatized him. By abandoning him. I left after he told me I was the source of his anxiety. That's not what he meant. Then what did he mean? She hesitated. The same hesitation Ryan always showed when asked that question, because there was no better explanation. Eventually, she said, his therapist was helping him process things, and you should have stayed and worked through it together. Something clicked in that moment. Not anger, not frustration, clarity. Patricia genuinely believed her son's problems belonged to other people. She always had. That realization explained a lot. I lowered my voice. Patricia. Why are you really here? Her expression shifted. Barely. But enough. Then she said it. The truth. If he loses that apartment, he'll have to move back home. There it was. The real issue. Not heartbreak. Not healing. Not trauma. Convenience. She didn't want her adult son moving back into her house. I almost laughed. Instead, I simply nodded. That sounds like Ryan's problem. Her eyes widened. How can you be so cold? I spent 4 years helping him. Because you loved him. I did. The words surprised even me. Past tense, not present. Past. I loved who I thought he was. Patricia's jaw tightened. Security began drifting closer. She noticed. This isn't over. She whispered. I looked directly at her. No. It probably isn't. She left moments later. But the real surprise arrived that evening. Messages began appearing from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Ryan's cousin. A former coworker. An old friend from college. One after another. Each conversation sounded strangely similar. Honestly, I don't blame you. He always does this. Nothing is ever his fault. Everyone becomes the villain eventually. A former coworker told me Ryan had blamed 3 different supervisors for identical problems. A college friend revealed he had gone through multiple therapists because none of them understood him properly. His cousin simply wrote, "Welcome to the club." That message stayed with me. Welcome to the club. Because suddenly, I wasn't looking at a recent problem. I was looking at a lifelong pattern. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. Saturday morning brought 47 unread messages. Most were from unknown numbers. Friends. Friends of friends. People I had never met. Apparently Ryan had spent the night gathering support, building his case, recruiting allies. But then, late that afternoon, Sophia called. The second I answered, I knew something unusual had happened. You need to hear this. What? Sophia lowered her voice. A friend of hers worked at the wellness center, where Ryan coached clients. Earlier that day, she had overheard part of a conversation. According to her, Ryan had been talking to someone on the phone. Desperate. Panicked. Trying to figure out how to make me come back. And before the call ended, he made a statement that sent chills through my body. Not because of what it was, because of what it revealed. For the first time, Ryan wasn't talking about love. He wasn't talking about healing. He wasn't even talking about me. He was talking about survival. And he was apparently willing to do almost anything to get what he wanted. When Sophia finished telling me what her friend had overheard, I sat in silence for a long time. The exact words weren't important. What mattered was the realization behind them. Ryan wasn't trying to save our relationship. He was trying to save the life he had built around me. There was a difference. A huge one. The next major development arrived the following Saturday evening. An unfamiliar number called my phone. Normally I would have ignored it. Something told me to answer. The woman on the other end introduced herself as a supervisor at Dr. Whitlock's clinic. Immediately, my attention sharpened. She was professional, careful, and very direct. "We are conducting an internal review regarding inappropriate contact with a non-patient." I already knew where this was going. She asked whether Dr. Whitlock had contacted me directly concerning Ryan. I told her, yes. Then I emailed the screenshots. The conversation lasted less than 10 minutes, but after I hung up, I knew something significant had happened. Someone had finally started asking questions. Monday morning, Ryan's messages took a dramatic turn. "What did you do? Dr. Whitlock is being investigated. This is your fault. She was only trying to help." I stared at the messages. The irony was almost impressive. A therapist contacts someone she shouldn't, a complaint is filed, an investigation begins, and somehow I was still the villain. Nothing had changed. The pattern remained exactly the same. Accountability always belonged to someone else. Then Patricia sent an email. To this day, it remains one of the most ridiculous things I have ever read. The subject line was, "Financial Arrangement Proposal." The email contained a detailed list: 3 months of rent assistance, émotionnel distress compensation, therapy reimbursement, lifestyle adjustment support. The grand total exceeded $15,000. At the bottom she wrote, "We believe this is a fair request, considering the circumstances." I forwarded the email to Sophia. 5 minutes later, she called me laughing so hard she could barely breathe. Neither of us responded. There was nothing to say. Reality was already handling things better than we ever could. A week later, more news arrived from the wellness center. Ryan's position had been terminated. Officially, the reasons were professional conduct concerns. Unofficially, calling an ex-partner's workplace and creating public drama apparently didn't inspire confidence in clients seeking emotional guidance. The Facebook campaign collapsed soon afterward. More people began speaking privately. Stories emerged from former friends, former coworkers, even former partners. The details varied. The pattern didn't. Someone set a boundary. Ryan became the victim. A narrative was created. A campaign followed. Then came the apartment situation. The apartment he couldn't afford. The apartment I was supposedly abusing him by not paying for. Ryan decided the solution was finding a roommate. He advertised online for someone mindful and supportive of a healing environment. Eventually, he found a young woman named Madison. At first, she seemed excited. Living with a wellness coach sounded appealing. The arrangement lasted less than a week. A few days later, she contacted me through social media. Apparently, my name had come up repeatedly in conversations. Her first message was simple. "Did you used to date Ryan?" When we eventually spoke, the stories were unbelievable. On her first day, Ryan held a house meeting, not to discuss rent, not chores, an urge. He explained how her energy could affect his emotional regulation. Certain foods weren't allowed because their smell increased his anxiety. The living room became unavailable during designated reflection periods. Normal household questions somehow became discussions about emotional labor. Medicine lasted 5 days. Then she left. Soon after, the landlord became involved. Ryan had apparently implied that I would continue helping with rent. When no money arrived, questions started being asked. The landlord called me directly because my contact information still existed in old records. I calmly explained the situation. He was not pleased. Eviction proceedings followed not long afterward. The final outcome surprised absolutely nobody. Ryan moved back in with Patricia. The very outcome everyone had been trying so desperately to avoid. Months passed. Life became quieter, then better. At work, I received a promotion. Without constant stress clouding every day, I found myself performing better than ever. I also started therapy. Real therapy. The kind focused on understanding yourself rather than assigning blame. My therapist never once suggested that another person's existence was responsible for my emotional state. That alone felt revolutionary. Eventually, I started dating again. His name was Ethan. Kind, funny, emotionally mature. When he asked how my day had been, he wasn't gathering evidence. He simply cared. The difference felt almost unreal. One evening, nearly a year after everything happened, Sophia and I were having dinner together. She shook her head and laughed. You know what's still crazy? What? He literally told you that you were his problem. I smiled. Pretty much. And then you agreed. I did. She pointed her fork at me. That's what broke his brain. Maybe she was right. Ryan expected a fight. Expected negotiations. Expected apologies. Expected me to prove my devotion by arguing against his accusations. Instead, I accepted his conclusion and removed myself from the equation. The victim's story couldn't survive without a villain. A few weeks later, one final message arrived. Not through text. Not through social media. Through LinkedIn. Of all places, Ryan claimed he had been doing deep work. He said he finally understood how much he had projected onto me. He wanted to apologize. He wanted closure. Maybe even reconciliation. I read the message once, then closed it. No anger. No satisfaction. No temptation. Just certainty. Some chapters don't need revisiting. Last I heard, he was still living with Patricia. Still searching for stability. Still searching for answers. Maybe he eventually found them. I honestly don't know. What I do know is this. The day Ryan told me I was the source of his anxiety felt devastating. At the time, it seemed like the end of everything. Looking back, it was actually the beginning. Because sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is believe people when they tell you who they are. And sometimes the best solution is exactly the simplest one. If someone insists you're the source of all their problems, you don't have to argue. You don't have to defend yourself. You don't have to stay. You can simply step away. Problem solved.